gotta tell you, it sure is nice having my life back. There was a number of years I wasn't able to drive, but the brain fog's gone. Just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Freed up my schedule from my wife's. We can do our own things. Not that we don't like to be together, but used to be my schedule was her schedule and her schedule was her schedule. But now, as I've said to a number of people, it's kind of like a teenager who just got his license for the first time. I was experiencing these waves of just getting hot. I'd start sweating, very uncomfortable in the classroom. I had a fan there which I kept near my desk so that even while instructing I could reach over and turn it on and stay cool. And I used to tease my wife at that time that I think I'm having sympathetic hot flashes, and she didn't think much of that, but I didn't know how to explain it. It was just very, very strange. That was the only thing going on, which honestly, like I said, made no sense to me. I couldn't understand why, because I was basically pretty healthy. I had various things with some cholesterol issues. I had suffered with allergies years before, but I'd never experienced anything like this. I started having pain exactly in the joint, and having had a mother who suffered from a horrible bursitis issue when I was a teenager, I thought, this must be bursitis. So I made an appointment, went to see the physician, and he did some moving of my arm and said, it probably is bursitis. We can give a cortisone injection and that should help you get over it. Well, that injection helped for about 2 weeks. And I called him back and said, it's back to the pain. He said, that tells me it's not bursitis. We need to get you in to see an orthopedist and we'll schedule an MRI. So we did so. And when I saw the orthopedist, he said, well, you look right here, there's a little shadow that indicates that you've got a rotator cuff tear. And we can fix it with surgery. As a matter of fact, we can schedule the surgery right now. The only thing is you're going to be unable to drive for something like 6-7 weeks. Anyway, it was a longer period of time than I felt I could sacrifice at that point, because I had just started the school year and my wife was working also. Our schedules did not match, and I said, I'm going to have to put that off. So he did a subsequent cortisone injection to kind of alleviate the pain of it. As time went, that wore off, and the pain became so severe that I thought, I'm going to have to bite the bullet, get the surgery, take 6-7 weeks off of school. And so I called to schedule the surgery. They couldn't get me in until the following February, which was about 4 months later. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I happened to be talking with a cousin of mine, and she said, well, why don't you go to the Pacific Surgical Institute? They've got orthopedists over there. Called him, got in on short order to have a consult with an orthopedist. He looked at exactly the same MRIs, came into the room and said, I don't think you have a torn rotator cuff. He said, I don't know exactly what's going on. Not bursitis, not torn rotator cuff. We could do surgery, but would make things worse. He said, I would recommend some physical therapy. So I did that for about 2, 3, 4 months, and it didn't really help much. So I'm kind of struggling with what should I do next. Ended up through a brother of mine finding about someone who did this electrical stimulation of the muscles. Well, it didn't work out well. It was intensely painful. The amount of electrical stimulation they put through would basically paralyze my arm, and it would actually sometimes be twitching uncontrollably. It didn't just hurt there, it hurt in all the muscles. So after about maybe 2 or 3 treatments, I just thought, this isn't cutting it. It's not doing anything for the shoulder pain. And at times the shoulder pain was bad enough that I had trouble sleeping. I couldn't get a comfortable position. I just kind of put up with the pain and tried to ignore it. Then in September, right after school started, my right arm started tremoring, especially in the hand. It was just at times shaking like this. And in order to get that to not really stop but control it, I would oftentimes sit with my hand under my thigh just to keep it from shaking, and it was kind of embarrassing at times. People were wondering, what's going on with your hand? It's just vibrating away. And I actually had a student one day say, "Mr. Byman, why does your hand keep shaking?" And I was kind of taken aback. I said, "Well, I don't know, but I'm going to see a neurologist this afternoon. I'll let you know once we find out." And there are some other interesting things that happened in the classroom. In order to write on the board, I had to stabilize my right arm by holding onto the forearm with my left hand. Otherwise, it was just worse than a doctor's signature. And one day I was prepping for a lab that the students were going to be doing, and I was showing them some of the preliminary tests that they needed to do, and I had to pour liquid from a beaker or flask into a test tube, and being right-handed, I picked the flask up with my right hand and realized I'm going to have that liquid going every place but the test tube. So I thought, no problem. My left hand doesn't shake. I'll just switch. Well, then the test tube's going like this. And I finally gave up and asked the student to pour the liquid in, and they obliged, still having no idea why this was going on at all. Honestly, I didn't even think about Parkinson's, even though in hindsight I should have, because in the early years of teaching I had an entire unit on the brain, and one of the lessons in that unit dealt with Parkinson's, and we actually looked at some video of the brain that was done either by OPB or NPR. I don't remember which. That was available for use in education, and there was a short segment on Parkinson's. This was in the days when they were just beginning to use interventions like L-DOPA in a liquid form, and that was showing some success. And then also, my mother-in-law had Parkinson's. But even then, with that much information, I did not connect the two at all. And like I said, in hindsight, I should have, I guess. But maybe being a little bit more optimistic than pessimistic, my mind didn't even want to go into some of those more scary or unwelcome diagnoses that there might be. So I eventually made an appointment to see a neurologist. I went in and he had me do some walking. He said, "You're not swinging your right arm like you should. that is something that happens with Parkinson's, but he said, we really don't have a test we can do at this time. I can't do a blood test, he lists a whole bunch of things that would definitively tell me that you've got Parkinson's. The only thing we could do is treat you with Sinemet, which is a traditional medication that helps replace the missing dopamine, which is the transmitter that is beginning to disappear. It's involved in smooth muscle movement, and it's also called the feel-good transmitter in that it makes you feel happy and settled. And he said, or it could be familial tremors, which they sometimes call essential tremors, because they essentially don't know what's causing it, is the way he put it. And he said the only way for us to really know would be if I treat you with Sinemet and the tremors subside. Then we know for sure at this point that it's Parkinson's. He said, what would you like to do? I said, well, I want to eliminate the Parkinson's, so as an option. So I'll gladly take the Sinemet. He prescribed it, and his office is down in Vancouver, which is about 40 miles south of Longview. Happened to be the same day that my daughter was graduating from massage therapy school, and so from the appointment I was going to go down to her graduation, but I get into the car, and then the enormity of the possibility of Parkinson's hit me. And I just sat there almost stunned, with tears kind of streaming down my face, thinking, what is going on? I drove on to the graduation. Afterwards, the family was going out to eat, and I told my wife and daughter, I have got to get back home and get the medication. I can't even focus on anything right now. It's just so overwhelming. So I drove back, got the medication filled, took the medication, and lo and behold, a number of hours later, I thought, something's changed. I feel so different. And I realized my hand wasn't shaking. And then I realized what that meant. And I was driving when that happened. And I'm just kind of driving the rest of the way home in a bit of a stupor. It's almost like I was, quote, shell-shocked for a number of days, trying to wrap my brain around what is going on. I see what my mother-in-law is going through. I have all this information that I used to be teaching in classes, and it was a moment where I guess you could say that amount of knowledge was almost too much for me, because I knew that the consequences could be very, very serious. I've got to try to keep a positive outlook on this. And in the beginning, that was hard. Our children were all grown and gone, had their own families. They knew what their grandmother was going through, my mother-in-law, and we had frequent calls. Oftentimes in the morning, just as I was getting ready to go to school, I'd be sitting in the chair all dressed and ready, just sort of in a bit of a stupor, trying to wrap my brain around it. A call would come from one of the kids asking how Dad's doing, and my wife would say, well, he's sitting in the chair getting ready to go to school, but just kind of sitting, gazing off into space. Just really hard to get my mind around it. And I remember that Monday going back to school, and in the class where the student had asked me, how come your hand's shaking all the time? I said, hey, look, it's not shaking. I'm on medication. I've got Parkinson's. Well, a lot of the kids had no idea what that was, and so we had a little lesson that day on what Parkinson's was and what it means and where it could go possibly, but I still was not very educated on it. And one of the things that helped me through a lot was having the type of sense of humor where I could eventually make little jokes about what was happening. But it took a long time to get there. In the course of learning about it, I've discovered that there are things that you can do that will not necessarily cure Parkinson's, but can slow things down dramatically, can eliminate some of the non-motor symptoms that can be incredibly annoying. We talked a bit about anxiety and insomnia and paranoia. Two of those, the doctors were treating me with drugs, which I haven't had to take now for 3 years because of the changes that I've been able to make with the help of a wonderful functional medicine doctor who's coached me through this and who has agreed to appear in one of the videos to talk about how he has approached these things, the reasons for doing what we're doing. And as I've said at some point, sometime, he has actually become my best friend in the medical community. And I'm not saying that to put down my neurologist or any of the other physicians I work with, because they have done their absolute best with the knowledge they have. And so far, every one of them has been nothing but supportive in the things that I'm doing. And it's just nice to be able to use this, as I told my functional medicine doctor, if there's any way that I can use this to pay forward the blessings that I have received in that God brought me to Him for help, then in these waning days of my life, I can feel very happy that maybe I've been able to touch even one person's life or encourage a few people to look into alternatives to drugs. And at some point I'll talk more about what has happened with the medications I was on, how many I've been able to get off of by going a more natural route. And so those I guess are parts of the blessings. And to realize that maybe I've been given a chance to help others in a way that I never would have if I had just sat back in misery, feeling sorry for myself, not looking for any alternatives. And one of my sons told me, "Dad, by doing what you're doing now, you're continuing the work that you used to do as a teacher." And my wife said, now all that science knowledge isn't, quote, useless knowledge anymore. You can go back to doing what you loved doing in a completely different way. Not often can a person say they got their life back, but I can say it now.